Today I want to share with you how I went from $0 to $800,000 in my dividend stock portfolio. I'll show you how to find these dividend stocks, what I personally look for, some of the mistakes I've made along the way, and the downsides of dividend investing. I'll also show you how this portfolio is now generating $18,500 a year and is on track to automatically turn into a lot more money.
Less can be more. That is the theme of this video. My portfolio of $140,000 versus Andrei Jikh's $800,000 portfolio and the dividends that it is going to generate over time. Will it be the much smaller portfolio or will it be the much larger portfolio? And to get into that, we're going to do something that I've never done on this channel before, but now it's time because transparency and legitimacy, they go together, and that is revealing my portfolio for the very first time. So if you like what you see and you're curious to know more about cover call ETFs and just what you can possibly do with them because they are interesting funds, and maybe you're a skeptic, a critic, you maybe think I'm a scammer or you don't trust me, well, man, just hit that sub button anyway and just follow along, and then you'll never miss a beat if you need to critique any future videos. Okay, so what we're gonna do first is get into the holdings right over here. We're going to be going through basically the performance of these funds against other indexes. We're going to be, of course, looking at the income because if you're into cover calls, you want to know about how much money it's generating, what is the average yield that I'm able to get to. And then at the very end, we're going to go into a dividend calculator and see how my portfolio will grow over time, produce dividends versus Andrei Jikh's portfolio and what that's going to produce. So stick around, buckle up, let's get going. So on the very first page here, we have holdings. And you can see here, I'm slightly under $140,000 portfolio. I got $74,662 in my TFSA. And then I have $65,283 in my wife's spousal RSP. And for those who don't really know the difference between a regular RSP, a spousal RSP, there's a few different accounts, but spousal RSP just means that I can contribute to her RSP and get the tax deduction. And one of the nice things about that strategy is it actually gives me flexibility over time. If I stop contributing to it over a 3-year period, then I can actually pull that money out and it will count against my wife's marginal tax rate and not mine because I pay heavy taxes. Okay, since the market has softened, I can see that the unrealized price performance is negative 4.6%. But I want to say that with an asterisk because some of the stuff we're going to be looking at here is much more important, which is the total return. Can't stress that enough, which is unrealized plus revenue. Unrealized price performance and dividends included. What does that look like for each fund? You can see here that basically when it comes to strategies, I hold a bunch of all-in-one funds. So these are cover call ETFs that invest in other cover call ETFs. So funds like HYLD, HYLD.U. Why do I have two? One is in my wife's spousal RSP and one is in my TFSA. So one is just is in with an American currency. One's in a Canadian hedge currency. HDIV, BMAX. What else we got here for all ones? HDIF, and everything else is just a bunch of sector specific. So sectors that I think are really important, like technology, energy, financials, and utilities. And basically in my TFSA, I have a 10% allocation to all of that. So if you stripped away HYLD.U, everything would have pretty much a 10% allocation or working towards a 10% allocation. And to see that for yourself, you can actually go into Blossom, which is a social investing app, and you can follow my portfolio there. Of course, all links will be in the description below, and of course to Andrei Jikh's video that we just saw. Okay, to just see a good difference between price performance and total return performance, let's look at this column here. So ENCC, which is my energy sector specific cover call ETF, price wise, it is generating 4.46%. But if you include the dividends, it is generating 8.15%. I think this is pretty good because I picked this up back in, I want to say maybe it was June or July. So over a couple months, it's been producing very well for me. Of course, HYLD, I've actually held this fund for a long time. It used to be the only thing in my TFSA. So probably around maybe $50,000 or $60,000 worth of HYLD. I've trimmed it a bunch. It has not performed this. This is a misnomer, a mistake. This percentage is just a reflection of the revenue overall that HYLG has generated while I've held it as a percentage of whatever amount of money is currently being held inside that fund. So basically $7,707. Actually thought it was more than that, but okay, $7,707 it is. I thought it would be more. Okay, let's look at another one that I've probably held for a while. HMAX. It's a financials cover call ETF. Price-wise, it's negative 10.6%, but the total return is 5.72%. So this just gives you an idea of by each fund what the performance is, as I think that's just important to show if you are someone who's interested in these funds, or you just want to maybe follow someone who invests wholesale in these kinds of strategies. Okay, so I mean, pretty basic there. We can see what each fund has been generating for me over the lifespan that I've held this. But again, a lot of these funds I've only been holding for a couple months. And the story behind that we're going to get to in the income tab. All right, so let's move over to performance, and we'll kind of just stay here for a minute so we can see how my portfolio has gone against other indexes. So since the beginning of the year, we've climbed up until we got about 12.54%, and then we dropped all the way down to 7.61%. So total return. So if we add in the measure of an index like the S&P 500, we can see that during the bull run of the summertime, the index took off, the cover call strategy lagged behind. If you're wondering like why that is, why is the cover call strategy not growing, is because there's this trade-off, right? When you get income, there's a certain portion of the portfolio, let's just call it, it could be any percentage, but a common amount might be 50%. Half of the portfolio doesn't get to participate, whereas the other half does and can do what the S&P 500 is doing. That's the trade-off for the higher yield, but it does offer some downside protection. As you can see here, back at its peak, the S&P was up 20%. The cover call strategy was up 10.6%, and to date, recording of this video, the S&P has dropped basically 9.5%, whereas the cover call strategy has dropped 3%, and that was back in the end of July. Now, if we add in other indexes like the TSX and the Dow Jones, the cover call strategy and the S&P 500 are certainly blowing away those indexes. But then when we add the NASDAQ 100, of course, the tech heavy index, it blows everybody away at 24.5%. But it is coming off a high of 37% in the summertime, dropping 13% since the end of July. Again, the cover call strategy compared to the NASDAQ dropping only 3% in that time. So just evidence of downside protection. Okay, now one of the main reasons that we invest in cover calls is the income that it can generate, whether it be to replace your expenses or you reinvest it. I reinvest it. So let's check it out and get a story behind what you're seeing here. Now, to start the year, I had two funds. I had XYLD by Global X and HYLD by Hamilton. And you can see here, like, why were there these big jumps? It's because XYLD paid out twice a month, every other month, basically. But that wasn't always the case. It was just the way that their option strategy worked. It was a little unpredictable that way. HYLD at the time, it paid me out a max of $714 back in April, but then it suffered a 2 cents per share loss. So it went from 14 cents in April to 12 cents a share that it would pay out in May. And it basically took my dividends from $714 down to $636. Now, it was at this point, I already knew I would need to diversify across other funds eventually, but this is when I really started to get serious about it because I didn't want to see another shock like that and to see that kind of decline. So I sold off basically a bunch of my TFSA. Of course, bad news sells, and with the fear of more increasing interest rates, I decided just to hold cash, but after a while decided I got to get my cash back in. And basically as of September, I have it all in. Again, with dividends at $1,446. And this to me is more of a normal kind of boring month over month performance to see a little bit of an increase. So we see $1,446, and in October I got paid out $1,471. That's basically a $25 increase. Okay, so now that we've seen that, let's compare Andrei's, which I took a picture of it here, so we can kind of explore a little bit. Let's income forecast. That's what we care about. So in 20 years, his portfolio is going to be generating $91,000, and that is with the dividend growth. I think was somewhere in the 3.1%. I saw that. Oh yeah, right here. Okay, 3.1% dividend growth. His yield is 2.35%. Well, yield on cost, we'll go with that one, 2.43%. Okay, so we'll keep some of those numbers in mind. After 20 years, $91,000. So where does the cover call strategy that I'm investing in end up after 20 years? So I put some metrics here in this dividend calculator. $140,000 in, $22,000 annual contributions. Basically, there's going to be no dividend growth. There's going to be no price appreciation. 11.5% annual yield over 20 years will get me, if nothing changed, $324,000 compared to Andrei's $91,000. Now, the reality is I wouldn't stick exactly with that contribution. And of course, things over 20 years change a lot. I'm going to sell a home. Maybe there will be other, I'm sure, income or business opportunities. So that will certainly change over time. But what about in the near term? I have $140,000 here. What about next year? What will Andrei's portfolio produce from them? So probably, let's call it maybe in the $20,000 range, 20 to 21,000. Well, I don't get to that point until year 2. So maybe 2025, I get to that point. But it's in 4 years that it's really interesting, where I make $33,000 and Andrei will make, by that point in 2028, $29,000. Now, some of you might be saying, well, he's American, you're Canadian, but just on a dollar to dollar comparison versus with our yields, I still think this is a fairly good comparison for the two. So I hope that was helpful, everyone. Again, this was a way of showing, giving you some ideas, maybe some inspiration of like whether this is something maybe you want to learn more about. And if you get value out of that, then of course, as always, subscribe, follow this story. I think it was, of course, important to share what I shared here and do it in a way that is not just simply a portfolio reveal, but basically using it as a way to compare against a more traditional portfolio that pays out a more traditional dividend growth strategy. So again, if you like what you saw, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video.